All right, good afternoon. Welcome to another edition of our Friday football showcase. Cory, Jason Dambach. We got a lot of great stuff to talk about. Penn State versus Maryland. How could Trevor Lawrence's absence impact Clemson, not only against Notre Dame, but what about in the college football playoff? If, say, Clemson loses, would they get a pass for that? And we're going to break tradition here a little bit. We're going to talk some college basketball. I've got an interesting scenario I want to get JD's thoughts on here about college hoops. He and I are both huge college basketball fans. What's going on today, pal? How you doing?
Man, I'm enjoying this weather. Isn't this crazy? I mean, early November and it's 70 degrees, and we've got a nice little stretch to enjoy.
I'm getting my kids after school. We're going to go hit the baseball field again. Anytime I can play some baseball, I'm going to do that. So if it's 70 degrees, we're getting out and playing. We're going to play something outside, man.
I follow the extent of my youth baseball viewing right now is through your Facebook feed. So keep it up, man.
That's great. That's great. All right. Okay. You're there in State College Center County. Is there much excitement for this Maryland game there?
You've asked me this question 3 weeks in a row, and I've definitely got to say zero, as far as I can tell right now, for this game this weekend especially. There was a little more activity last weekend than maybe I would have anticipated. Not a lot, certainly, on the scale of what you would normally see, but there was certainly some excitement for the Ohio State game, and the fact that it was Halloween and sort of a prime time game and prime opponent, even if you couldn't go in. Not seeing much heat at all for this game, frankly. It's a game that I think Penn State fans expect to win, and certainly, I think we all would expect them to win, but it's sort of like that situation where you're 0-2, you expect to win, but you can't get overexcited or overconfident. So no, I think it's another week where this unusual 2020 football season rolls on, and when you're Penn State and you're 0-2 and your dreams are on the verge of really being shattered with really one more loss, you can write them off for any kind of opportunity to go to a Big Ten championship game. I think that dampens things even further.
I think this might be the least interesting Penn State Big Ten game ever.
Oh, that's interesting.
Fans can't go. Now, look, it's Maryland. Penn State has beaten Maryland 163-6 over the last three meetings. And Penn State's favored by 24.5 points. So people expect a blowout. If it's not a blowout, then people are going to be wondering what's wrong. If you beat Maryland by 10, hey, there are going to be some serious questions. The reason I say it might be the least interesting Penn State Big Ten game ever, that there have been less interesting non-conference games, Coastal Carolina, Idaho, that kind of thing, Indiana State. You still had close to 100,000 fans at those games, JD. Fans can't go to this game. And that's why I think with Penn State being 0-2, I think the TV rating will be halfway decent, because it'll be on TV and it'll give Penn State fans a chance to watch. But I think a blowout is expected. And when you can't be at the stadium, that to me is the biggest difference here, that the level of engagement, I think is really at an all-time low for Penn State this week. Now, let me say this. If they beat Maryland, crush them, figure out some things, beat them 55-10, okay. Now maybe you turn the tide a little bit and you start to feel a little bit better about this Penn State football team, and maybe you start to get some of that excitement back.
Let me ask you this. So Maryland has been in the Big Ten roughly, 6 years, 7 years, somewhere in that neighborhood. So there was a lot of excitement about Maryland. Well, I shouldn't say there was excitement. I mean, it was an interesting move, right? Maryland going from the ACC to the Big Ten, but I think there was some excitement out of Penn State fans that, okay, we've got a regional opponent, a rival, same with Rutgers.
They're unrivaled, JD. Unrivaled.
They're unrivaled. I get it, right. But a regional opponent, we'll call it. Now, they beat the tar out of Maryland and Rutgers for years, but you had some hope, right, for this Maryland-Penn State. Again, they're unrivaled, but, it could be a rivalry. It's a border state game and all of that. And again, it's been so uncompetitive. You remember the game, I think it was it Franklin's first year where the Maryland players refused to shake hands, and then they won the game and got everybody up in arms, but since then it's been all Penn State. I'd say overall, this Maryland Penn State meeting has really been a flop compared to what we had hoped it would be when Maryland joined the Big Ten, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. I think that's a great point, going back to the handshake game. And it was 59-0 last year. Maryland has quit in these games. So I think Penn State's going to win. My score is 41-20. I'll get your score in a minute. I don't have them covering that 24.5 points. But for all the reasons that you just said, now, if you're a Penn State football fan, you want to see a blowout so you can feel better. But for all the reasons you just said, I'd like to see a more competitive game. I'd like to see a closer game. I'd like to see Maryland show some pride. I'm very, very much looking forward to seeing Talia Tagovailoa. I thought his brother was phenomenal, Tua, at Alabama. I watched the fourth quarter comeback against Minnesota, and the kid was making some tremendous throws. If he can do that against a Penn State defense that plays off the receivers, I can see Maryland moving the ball. However, if Penn State gets up 14, 17 points in this game, there's no reason to believe that Maryland's kids won't just quit, because that's what they've done the last 3 years.
Yeah, and we don't know how it would have turned out with DJ Durkin if he would have remained the coach there. I mean, maybe he would have gotten things turned around. Mike Locksley, look, the guy won 2 games at New Mexico. So to expect him to come in and compete in the Big Ten, I'm not sure what they were thinking when they made that hire, to be honest with you. It's not a well-coached team. It's not a very interesting team, although Tagovailoa, the quarterback, certainly last week showed some things. And because of his name and who his brother is, I think that's certainly going to, put some eyeballs on Maryland at times. But, that was an interesting game. I watched actually most of that game last Friday night. They got out to the big lead. Minnesota comes all the way back. And then it was kind of like a defining win almost for Mike Locksley. I don't know that they're going to have many more wins like that. Many wins at all, frankly. But that was a good game. They played very well. And like you said, Tagovailoa he showed flashes of what he can be, because he was terrible in that Northwestern game. If you saw any of that, they couldn't do anything against Northwestern. So I guess we don't really know what to expect there. Like you said, I think he can make some plays against Penn State, but this should be an easy win for the Nittany Lions. If it's not, well, I guess we're going to all have a lot to write about.
Yeah, absolutely. What kind of score do you have in this? Again, the line's 24.5, Penn State favored.
I was shocked by that. I don't know about you. I was a little surprised to see that high of a line. I figured 18, 19, maybe bordering on 3 touchdowns, but as high as that line is, I was a bit surprised. I'm going to stay right at the line. I'm going to say 41 to 17, somewhere in that neighborhood will be the final score of this game.
All right, let's move on to a big game nationally with Clemson playing Notre Dame. All right, Trevor Lawrence will not play in this game. I want to get your thoughts on what if Notre Dame beats them. I am picking Notre Dame to beat Clemson. I am. I think Clemson is really having some issues now. I mean, that's how good Trevor Lawrence was, and the backup quarterback. I think Notre Dame, this is their chance. And I'm not a big Notre Dame guy. I think they've laid an egg in these kind of situations over the years. But this is their chance to stand up and say, hey, look, we are ready for this kind of game. What if Clemson loses and it's a close game? Will they still be given a pass, a free play, maybe into the college football playoff, GD, because the committee will realize, hey, you're without basically the Heisman Trophy front runner that Trevor Lawrence was. Now I think it's Justin Fields. Will Clemson be given a free pass if they lose this by 3 to 7 points?
They may not be given a free pass in the short term. I don't think they would drop very far. So to some degree, yes, I think they would get a pass from the standpoint that they might only drop down to 3rd or something like that in the rankings, because that's certainly a tough task for the backup quarterback. I had his name down last week too. It was DJ Uigalale, but I've already forgotten it. So I'll try and work on that. But I think they'll get somewhat of a short-term pass. Long-term, if they can rebound. Now, again, the hardest part of their schedule is gone, right? They've already played Miami. This will be their last really tough remaining game. They should win the rest of their games all the way on out. So they're going to get back to even if they lose this game, they're certainly going to play Notre Dame in the ACC title game. And if they then beat Notre Dame with Trevor Lawrence in the ACC title game, then they're right back to where they should be. They may not be number one, but they'll be in the Final Four and get a chance to go to the college football playoff. So I do think in a way this might be interesting for Clemson because, look, if they lose with Trevor Lawrence in South Bend, that might look a little bit different than losing with your backup quarterback. And Notre Dame, now they had that kind of weird game against Louisville a couple of weeks ago where they only won 12-7, then they blew the doors off of Pitt, and then we're sort of okay against Georgia Tech. So I actually still give Clemson a bit of the edge in this game. I'm still going to pick Clemson to win this game. So you and I can disagree on that. I think they'll do enough. They'll insulate the quarterback and do enough to disrupt the Notre Dame offense, which, at time, now they're big and physical, Notre Dame, and usually they're bigger and more physical than everybody else they play. That's not always going to be the case against Clemson. I think Clemson, they've been kind of skating through the last few weeks. They almost lost to Boston College. Mm-hmm. They didn't do what we expected them to do against Syracuse. So I do think that their backs are somewhat up against the wall as they possibly could be for an undefeated number one team in the country.
Yeah, and you're right. If they get a chance to avenge the loss later on, I'm just looking at this. What if you've got an undefeated Cincinnati? Okay, so then you say you had Alabama undefeated, Ohio State. What if you had an undefeated Cincinnati, and then it comes down to Georgia? I guess Georgia could still lose in the SEC title game, so that would be a second loss. What if you had an undefeated BYU? Is there anybody else? If Clemson and Notre Dame split, you'd figure Clemson would probably get the edge if Trevor Lawrence plays down the road. But what about if there's an undefeated BYU or a Cincinnati? How would that play in? Or would the big dog Clemson or Notre Dame with one loss still get in?
I think because their loss would be without Trevor Lawrence, I've got to think that would factor in. But even if not, I think Clemson, they get that one loss. Look, it's happened before, right? I mean, they've lost games before. They lost to Pitt in 2016. They lost to Syracuse in 2017. Those losses aren't anywhere near as excusable as a loss at Notre Dame would be. Now, I get it that a lot of it would have to do with the other teams and the landscape of college football.
What if you can't play?
You can't tell me that a one-loss Clemson.
What if you can't play an ACC title game? What if, by some chance, the schedule played out that way, that there was a problem because of COVID or something, and this is the only meeting between the two? What if that happens?
Yeah, I mean, there's a million hypotheticals in a season like this. I mean, who knows? I mean, we could play that game all day. We could go down this big rabbit hole, but let's just assume that all the games are played and the scenario plays out the way you laid it out. I've got to think Clemson's still in there, because as much as they want to talk about it's about a snapshot of this year and it only matters this year, Clemson's got a lot of equity, man. And if it comes down to Clemson and Cincinnati or Clemson and BYU, well, first of all, I think Clemson, the numbers and everything would probably give them the nod anyway. Because again, you're talking about having beaten a Notre Dame team who could be number one in the country if that happened, if they played in the ACC title game. How do you keep Clemson out? I don't think you can.
All right. We're going to switch gears here a little bit and talk some college basketball on our football show. But this is an interesting, because college basketball is due to start up here in a few weeks. There's an interesting story out today. John Rothstein, national college basketball reporter, talking about how sources are saying the Big East could play conference games in a bubble schedule, convene in one place, play a bunch of games. JD, I'm thinking that college basketball season could be in jeopardy for this reason. We're getting 100,000 coronavirus cases per day in this country. It's November 6th. What's that going to look like on December 6th? What's that going to look like on January 6th when you're in the heart of winter and it's 5 degrees in the north and northeast? I'm just wondering, one, how much of a college basketball season we could have, and two, this idea of a bubble, which I really like. Instead of sending Penn State and Minnesota and Illinois and Nebraska all over the place to play 2 or 3 games a week and all this travel and going into all of these environments, send a bunch of teams to Indianapolis for 6, 8, 10 days. Have them play every day, every other day. Have them play 5 times in 10 days. Get some conference games in that way. Do you think that's a feasible way to do this?
Yeah, I absolutely do. And it's being done. I mean, there are already, I know what you mentioned about the Big East and they're talking about it. But just earlier this week, the University of Louisville decided that they were going to put together their own 8-team bubble. They call it an MTE, a multi-team event, which is allowed per NCAA rules this year and allows teams to have a little extra leeway. And they're convening 8 teams, mostly beatable teams, but that Seton Hall is part of it as well. And they're coming to Louisville. They're going to play games in Louisville's basketball arena. They're all going to stay in a hotel that's attached to the KFC Yum Center, and they're going to get games in that way. And so there are models out there where this could absolutely be done. And I think it is probably, to your point, Cory, the best way to save the college basketball season, because I agree. Look, to have Illinois go to Rutgers on a Tuesday night, fly back home, and then have Wisconsin fly to Champaign and play a game on Saturday and have a traditional college basketball schedule, I mean, I would put the chances of that being pulled off at less than 50% based on what we know about COVID. And let's not forget, we've seen it through the college football season. Entire games have been canceled, not postponed, but canceled. Players are dropping left and right, being put on the COVID, list. In basketball, the margin is razor thin. You only have, 14 players. Of those, 11 or 12 are really legitimately usable. You lose a couple guys. How do you play some of these games? So, we know that they are student athletes. We get that. But for the most part, they're going to be going to school virtually anyway at a lot of these universities. So they can still go to class, hopefully. And if you can put them in this bubble environment and play the games, I think it's probably our best chance. So, I would love to see it.
Yeah, I agree. I think they're going to have to do something along this line to be able to – because, again, you just can't have Penn State flying to Minnesota on a Tuesday, then on a Friday coming back and then flying to, Champaign, then coming back on a Sunday and playing a game against Wisconsin, which is flying in from somewhere. There's just too much travel. It's too much travel. And yeah, even though these teams might be isolated with their charters and things like that, you're still talking about a lot of situations where you can encounter different scenarios. So look, I love college basketball. You love college basketball. It pained me of all sports that we lost this year. It pained me the most to see the loss of the NCAA tournament. I know we both have a huge affinity for that. And I'm fearful that could happen again. I honestly am, because you're talking March, JD. I've said this several times. I've written this. The virus doesn't give a damn what we want. And if we're talking March and we're trying to convene, hundreds and thousands of players and coaches and personnel into these areas, it's going to be hard. So we got to do everything we can to be as safe as possible in January and February, just to hope to get to March.
And the NCAA and its 357, I think it is, Division I programs, they need this season. The NCAA needs this season. The majority, I mean, not just a majority, right? Yeah. Like 90% of the NCAA's revenue is directly tied to the NCAA tournament, whether it be TV rights or ticket sales, sponsorships, you name it. It has to happen. So take take the affinity that we all have for March Madness out of it. We've got to play this season or else there are going to be some significant major problems in the NCAA maying forward in terms of, programs maybe being cut and the loss of all that revenue. It may be hard to recover from what we've already lost, Cory. To think about maybe losing it again is going to be difficult. But again, this is where that weird thing with how the NCAA works. It's in the conference's hands. So there's 31 different decisions about how we're going to play a basketball schedule. And you just hope that by March, everybody's played enough games and we're still standing where we can have a tournament. But this wonky system that we have in college athletics in our country, who knows?
Yeah,
I mean,
I agree.
We might have some teams and some conferences might get it figured out, but how do you, what do you do in the Northeast Conference? What do you do, out down in the MEAC or the SWAC, these smaller conferences that don't have the resources? How does this all work?
Yeah.
I'm very interested to see what they figure out, because Cory, I think this is going to be a great basketball season if we can play it. A lot of guys that would have gone to the NBA came back.
Yep.
The Big Ten, and especially, it's loaded. I mean, you look at, and the top teams are not the traditional ones. Iowa and Illinois might be the top two teams. Wisconsin is loaded again. It may not bode well for Penn State in their situation, but I think particularly when you look at the Big Ten, this is going to be a great season, a lot of talent.
Well, for the record, I vote for the Wooden Award, which is the College Basketball Player of the Year, and I voted for Luka Garza last year because he was better against better competition than Obi Toppin was for Dayton, who won the award. Luka Garza, I think, got robbed. I mean, he came back. So yes. There's one. Now, we're going to talk a lot more basketball. JD and I, we're going to do maybe a Friday basketball showcase show here during the winter, because that's going to be a lot of fun. But that's going to wrap up another edition of our Friday football showcase. Real quick, JD, what's your score for Penn State, Maryland again?
I have 41-17 Penn State.
All right, so we're pretty close there. I'm 41-20, so right on that 24-point line. We're both kind of teetering. Hey, thanks for the time, buddy. We'll do this again next week.
Okay. Have a great weekend, everybody.